working the night shift. The gas station on the edge of Boise, Idaho was small and quiet, surrounded by nothing but empty fields and a 2-lane highway that stretched into the darkness. My boss, Greg, swore it was safe. "Nothing ever happens out here," he'd said with a grin, but that didn't stop me from feeling uneasy every time I locked the doors at midnight. That night started like any other. It was just past 10 p.m. and the store was empty except for me and the dull hum of the fluorescent lights. I was restocking shelves when I saw headlights pull into the lot. A beat-up pickup truck came to a stop near Pump 3, but no one got out. I watched from behind the counter, waiting for the driver to step out and pay. After a minute, the door opened and a man climbed out. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Something about him made my skin crawl. He didn't look at me as he walked toward the store, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I straightened up, forcing myself to stay calm as he pushed the door open and stepped inside. "Evening," I said, trying to sound friendly. He didn't respond. Instead, he wandered down the aisles, his movements slow and deliberate. I kept an eye on him as I pretended to organize the candy display. He stopped near the back of the store, staring at the refrigerators as if deciding on a drink. But he wasn't really looking, he was glancing over his shoulder, watching me. My gut told me something was wrong. "Can I help you find anything?" I called out, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. He turned slightly, shaking his head. Then he grabbed a bottle of water, walked to the counter and set it down. His eyes met mine for the first time, and I noticed how pale his face was, how his hands trembled slightly as he pulled out a crumpled bill from his pocket. I rang him up quickly, eager for him to leave. "That'll be $1.50. He didn't move. He just stood there staring at me. "You alone tonight?" he asked. The question sent a chill down my spine. I forced a smile and shook my head. "No, my co-worker's in the back." His lips twitched into what I think was supposed to be a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He dropped the bill on the counter, grabbed his water and walked out without another word. I watched as he got back into his truck, but he didn't leave. He just sat there, the engine idling, his headlights pointed at the store. My fingers hovered over my phone. Should I call the police? What would I even say? That a guy bought water and made me nervous. Then the truck's lights shut off. The parking lot plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the store's flickering neon sign. My heart pounded as I watched the truck and the man inside disappear into the shadows. I tried to shake it off, telling myself he'd left and that I was overreacting, but an hour later, I heard it. A faint rustling sound coming from the side of the building. I froze, my ears straining to catch it again. There it was. Someone was outside. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands trembling as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. "I think someone's outside the gas station. They've been sitting in the parking lot and I don't know, Stay inside and lock the doors," she said. "An officer is on the way." I hung up and bolted the front door, then grabbed the baseball bat Greg kept under the counter. The rustling grew louder, followed by a faint tapping on the glass. My breath caught as I turned toward the window. There he was, standing just outside, his face pressed against the glass. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and his breath fogged up the window as he stared at me. He lifted his hand and tapped again, his fingernails scraping against the glass. The sound of sirens cut through the night, and the man vanished into the shadows. Moments later, a patrol car pulled into the lot, its headlights sweeping over the parking lot. 2 officers stepped out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Are you okay?" one of them asked as I unlocked the door to let them in. I nodded, still clutching the bat. He was here. He was right outside the window. The officers searched the area, but the man was gone. They found tire tracks leading away from the lot, but nothing else. One of them stayed with me until my shift ended, assuring me they'd patrol the area throughout the night. I quit the night shift the next day, Greg tried to convince me to stay, but I couldn't do it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's face pressed against the glass, his unblinking eyes staring back at me. To this day, I don't know what he wanted or why he chose that gas station, but every time I drive past it, I can't help but glance toward Pump 3, half expecting to see those headlights again. I picked up the night shift at the gas station to make some extra cash. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but in Laredo, Texas, options were limited. The station was on a desolate stretch of highway, surrounded by miles of scrubland. Most nights were quiet, with just the occasional trucker or local stopping by. But last Thursday wasn't like most nights. It was just after midnight when the bell over the door jingled, signaling a customer. I glanced up from the counter to see a man walk in. He was in his 40s, tall, with a lean build and a face that looked like it had seen too many long days. His clothes were dusty, and he had the kind of tired eyes you'd expect from someone who'd been driving for hours. "Evening," I said, trying to sound friendly. He gave a short nod and headed for the coolers in the back. I went back to scrolling on my phone, half watching as he grabbed a soda and a bag of chips. When he came up to the counter, he placed his items down and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. "Just these?" I asked. "And 20 on Pump 4, he said, his voice low and gravelly. I rang him up and handed back his change. As he turned to leave, he paused and looked at me, his brow furrowed. "That pump working okay?" I hesitated. Pump 4 had been acting up earlier that evening, but it seemed to have fixed itself. "Should be fine now. If it gives you trouble, let me know." He nodded again and walked out. I watched him through the glass as he got into an old sedan and pulled up to the pump. The car was beat up, with dents along the side and a license plate so caked with dirt I couldn't read it. He stepped out, grabbed the nozzle, and started fueling. A few minutes later, the bell rang again. I looked up, expecting to see the same man coming back to complain about the pump. But it wasn't him. It was another man, younger, maybe in his 30s, with a shaved head and a leather jacket. His eyes darted around the store as he walked to the counter, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "You see a guy come in here?" he asked, his tone sharp. I blinked. Yeah, just a few minutes ago. Why?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced out the window toward Pump 4. The first man was still there, leaning against his car as the pump clicked off. The younger man's jaw tightened. "Did he say anything to you?" he asked. "No," I said, uneasy. "Just bought some gas and snacks. Why?" The younger man didn't reply. He turned on his heel and walked out, the door slamming shut behind him. I watched as he strode across the lot, heading straight for the man at Pump 4. Their conversation started quietly, but it quickly escalated. The younger man was gesturing wildly, his voice rising as he got closer to the older man. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the tension was palpable. The older man shook his head and started to get back into his car, but the younger man grabbed his arm. That's when I saw the knife. My heart jumped as the blade glinted under the fluorescent lights. The older man froze, his hands raised in surrender. The younger man was shouting now, his words muffled by the glass. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, my fingers trembling. 911, what's your emergency? There's a fight at the gas station, I said quickly. One of them has a knife. The dispatcher asked for the address and assured me officers were on their way. I stayed on the line, my eyes glued to the scene outside. The older man was backing away from the pump, his hands still up, but the younger man wasn't letting up. He grabbed the older man's jacket and shoved him against the car. It felt like an eternity before the flashing blue and red lights appeared on the horizon. The younger man saw them too. He shoved the older man one last time, then bolted, sprinting across the lot and disappearing into the scrubland beyond. The older man slumped against his car, visibly shaken. The police pulled in moments later. Two officers approached the older man while another searched the area with a flashlight. I stepped outside, still clutching my phone, and told them everything I'd seen. The older man explained that the younger guy had been following him for hours. "I don't even know him," he said, his voice shaking. "He just started tailing me on the highway. I pulled in here to try and lose him." The officers took statements and searched the area, but the younger man was long gone. They promised to keep an eye out and suggested the older man find somewhere safe to stay for the night. After the police left, the older man came back into the store. He looked exhausted, his hands still trembling as he bought another bottle of water. "Thanks for calling them," he said quietly. "No problem," I replied. "Are you going to be okay?" He nodded, though he didn't look convinced. As he left, I watched him drive off into the night, the taillights of his car fading into the darkness. It was a slow night at the gas station where I worked just outside of Bend, Oregon. The shifts were usually uneventful, a mix of truckers passing through and locals grabbing snacks. I didn't mind the quiet. It gave me time to catch up on podcasts or scroll through my phone. But that night, something felt different. It was nearing 11 p.m. when the first unusual thing happened. A beat-up sedan pulled into the lot, its headlights flickering as it came to a stop near Pump 6. The car sat there for a moment, engine running, but no one got out. I watched through the window, waiting for the driver to make a move, but the car stayed idle. After a few minutes, I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. The cold hit me instantly, and I zipped up as I approached the car. I knocked lightly on the driver's window. The man behind the wheel turned to look at me. He was middle-aged, with unkempt hair and eyes that darted nervously around the lot. "You okay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone friendly. He nodded quickly, but his hands gripped the steering wheel like he was bracing for impact. "Yeah," he muttered, "just deciding what to get." "All right," I said, stepping back. "Let me know if you need anything." I turned to head back inside, but as I walked away, I caught a glimpse of something in the back seat. A figure. A woman, her face pale and blank, staring straight ahead. Back inside, I tried to shake off the weird feeling. Maybe it was just his wife or a passenger who'd fallen asleep, but something about her stillness stuck with me. 15 minutes passed, and the car hadn't moved. The man hadn't come inside either. I glanced out the window, my unease growing. The woman was still there, sitting in the exact same position, her gaze unflinching. I was debating whether to call someone when the door jingled, and the man walked in. His movements were jerky, almost hesitant, as he made his way to the counter. "Just this," he said, placing a bottle of water and a pack of gum on the counter. "Long drive?" I asked, trying to keep things casual. "Yeah," he said quickly, not meeting my eyes, "heading out of town." I rang him up and handed him his change. As he grabbed the items, I couldn't help but ask, "Everything okay with your passenger?" His hand froze mid-reach. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he looked up, his expression unreadable. "Passenger?" I gestured toward his car. The woman in the back seat. His face went pale. "There's no one in the back seat." I stared at him, my heart skipping a beat. I thought I saw someone," I said, my voice faltering. He didn't reply. Instead, he grabbed his things and rushed out the door. I watched as he got back into the car, his movements frantic. The engine roared to life and the sedan sped out of the lot, disappearing into the night. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to process what had happened. Had I imagined it? Was the woman real? And if she wasn't, what had I seen? I thought that was the end of it. But an hour later, as I was closing up for the night, the same car pulled back into the lot. This time, the headlights were off, and the car rolled to a stop near the edge of the property. My stomach twisted as I watched the driver's door open. The man stumbled out, looking disheveled and terrified. He ran toward the the store, waving his arms. I unlocked the door as he reached it, his breath coming in short gasps. She's in the car, he stammered. What? I asked, my heart racing. The woman, the one you saw, she's in the back seat, but she's not. His voice broke off, and he grabbed my arm. You have to call someone, please. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation as best as I could. The dispatcher assured me officers were on the way. The man paced the store, muttering to himself as we waited. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see the woman in the car again. But the back seat was empty. When the police arrived, the man ran out to meet them, pointing toward his car and shouting about the woman. The officers approached cautiously, flashlights cutting through the dark. They searched the car thoroughly but found nothing. One of them came back into the store. There's no one there, he said. Are you sure you saw someone? I nodded, my hands trembling. She was there. I swear the man's shoulders slumped as he leaned against the counter. I'm not crazy, he whispered. She's been following me since I left Seattle. Every time I stop, she's there. But she's not real. She can't be real. The officers took his statement and escorted him away, likely to get him some help. I locked up the store and drove home, my mind racing with questions. I don't know what I saw that night, or if the man's fear was real.